Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm really pleased to be here. I'm actually based in Ottawa, Canada, so it's nice doing something right down the road almost in Vancouver. I'm based in Ottawa, though, so of course it's across the country a little bit more. It's a small group. It's going to be a pretty fast-paced session actually today. I actually have a lot of material to try to get through. But I'll guarantee everyone attending and attending remotely, you're going to get a lot of value out of this session. And you're actually going to end up saving hundreds of dollars, believe it or not, just by being here. Because I'm going to show you some links that most people don't know exist. This is the short answer. Okay, so with that said, so the agenda today then, so quickly walk through some quick introductions. We'll talk about objectives, talk about the hybrid cloud and federation, some data jurisdiction updates based on some ISO work that I've been contributing to, some new cloud perspectives moving forward, OpenStack fit and INTOS, and I'll talk about INTOS in just a second, and the summary and potential activities for OpenStack community to consider moving forward. So a little bit about me. I actually work with a lot of smart people is the short answer. So I participate with a lot of the different standards bodies and standards groups. What my wife usually asks me is, how many of these folks actually pay you? So that's usually kind of an issue. And so I participate in those standards groups, making sure that they actually progress, move forward, and they actually are writing documents and standards that are actually valuable and executable. I actually work with the customer side of the house, being governments and large enterprises. And then I also work on the provider side of the house, trying to get them organized and set up to provide valuable, robust, secured services to their customers in a trusted, transparent manner. So in that respect, I've been helping out a startup company called INTOS on their OpenStack platform. So they've been trying to set up their product over the last few years, and have finally got it to the stage now where it's actually ready for evaluation and actual benchmarking. So a little bit about them in that respect. So you can go to their website, but in general, what it is, it's a highly agile enterprise quality platform. The folks that developed it, largely from the telco side, so they're aware around actually designing things that are going to be set up for a distributed environment, highly available, robust, secured, transparent. And right now, I've been helping them make sure and giving them a heads up around things like Internet of Things, edge computing, some of the other considerations around data governance and overall data jurisdiction compliance requirements that are starting to be discussed in the international communities. They're also based in Ottawa, and very much they actually see themselves as supporting small, medium businesses and also getting involved with some of the research groups and academia is where they're positioning their product right now. So the objectives today, we're going to present hybrid cloud and Geo Jurisdiction international considerations. We're going to actually have an interactive exchange of information and perspectives. I'll probably hold that off until the end, though, just because of the fact with the mics and this being recorded. I know it's a challenge at times with mic running. Provide awareness of the different cloud federation activities. Identify OpenStack and INTOS components, some of those lessons that they've learned. Just in the exchanges of information, how they've taken the information to try to direct some of their priorities moving forward. And identify, some of the gaps and how to fill some of those gaps and future activities and considerations to drive OpenStack so that they actually incorporate some of these strategic directions that the different standards bodies are now pushing and best practices are now pushing as well. So hybrid cloud, just to start. So this is just, in simple terms, I know all of us are all aware of this idea in terms of it's any combination of once you start combining public cloud, private cloud, community cloud. And it isn't just a matter of using them. So quite often I hear enterprises say, well, we're actually just made a strategic decision that we're going to be hybrid cloud at the enterprise level. Well, of course you are. Everybody is. You know, everybody's using a combination of private clouds and public clouds. The key is, though, to really be really robustly hybrid, it means you're actually applying more automation and you're actually, binding together and automating where possible the interoperability, the data portability, and the application portability. So it's a matter of you really are actually automating rather than just leveraging. So that's the key definition that I look at. In terms of industry work, one of the groups that I participate with, and they're actually meeting upstairs as well as we speak, is a Cloud Federation group working in conjunction with NIST, the National Institute of Standards of Technology, through the US Department of Commerce, and IEEE. It's under P2302. If you noticed on my introductory slide, I did actually go and have a link to actually a page where I'm actually putting different references, and that'll be posted, and we'll jump to that actually at the end of the presentation as well. So this is our first kick at the can for a federation reference architecture. Why they're doing it is quite simple. NIST has been mandated, and it's one of their activities that they were mandated to do as part of their Cloud First initiative years ago. So it was one of the elements that they actually requested NIST to look after to try to foster and promote interoperability between the different consumers of cloud, but also between the different cloud providers. So first cut of the can, we're looking at then, you can see regulatory environment A, regulatory environment B, and C. There's going to be this element and concept of a federation broker. And then, of course, the cloud carrier is providing that connectivity element. And, of course, there's going to be an audit responsibility as well. If you notice, one box that's in common everywhere is, of course, the security element. And as I mentioned, they're actually meeting in room 306 today, up on the 3rd level, and having some discussions. I'm going to be actually probably trying to get them to have a discussion around basically Iraqi roles and responsibilities matrix discussion, because I can see that depending on what activities you're trying to perform, you need to clarify who's ultimately accountable for what. So I've taken that information back to the startup company, Intos, just saying, okay, just as a sanity check, because again, we want to make sure that we can actually execute on this. And these are realistic, valuable models that can actually be then executable. So what they did was they took that federation broker element and then they broken it down into, okay, how does it actually fit into the OpenStack model? And then they took that information and they transferred it into their actual products and services, just to actually have the mapping clarified in terms of what components likely have to be touched or impacted in order to actually execute on the elements that was actually identified under P2302. Now, on the geo jurisdiction side, it's a very interesting discussion, especially because of course, GDPR. So it's everywhere. So I guess tomorrow it kicks in, right? I think tomorrow is the big day when we're going to find out exactly how serious things get for GDPR. So that really has pushed things to the forefront. So a lot of the initiatives from the EU have been driving a lot of the North American privacy initiatives as well. In Canada, they're just actually adjusting some of our privacy legislation because honestly in the past we actually had privacy regulation, but it really didn't have very much teeth to it. In the last few weeks, in fact, they've been working on and clarifying and finalizing some of the privacy considerations in the Canadian space as well. Just curious, how many of you here are Canadians? Okay. So yeah, the other interesting thing in Canada is that we often actually have very stringent regulation around data moving outside of Canada. So we have Big Brother to the south of us. So there's a lot of concern around the Patriot Act. Governments don't want their data to move there. British Columbia and Nova Scotia are the two provinces with the most stringent data and privacy regulations in place. So for them, they actually regulated saying no government data can even leave BC. And some of these regulations are interesting because they're almost in non-compliance sometimes because they're often political aspirations rather than realistic aspirations. So what I mean by that is from here to Victoria, so the capital of British Columbia is actually Victoria. So it's just across the water. The interesting thing is, though, the main trunk line connecting Vancouver to Victoria runs through US waters. So very interesting in terms of just, it's a matter of being realistic with those policies and then actually executing them and being realistic. So now in the EU, I know quite often when I talk to people there, they go, who cares? You should be encrypting the data or tokenizing the data, protecting it appropriately anyway. Of course it's crossing boundaries. Not a big deal. Here in Canada, we're still very much locked into this mentality of, oh no, our data might be moving across into another zone. So some of that is going to be cultural change in terms of just understanding that we should be actually embracing the cloud and some of those benefits that go along with the fact that you can actually have your data in different jurisdictions. So in that respect, I participate and contribute to ISO SC38 and SC7 communities. So SC7 is systems, and SC38 is cloud computing and distributed systems. So the one group that I participated in and provided content on was actually around the geo jurisdictions. So the reality is that you actually have these different types of jurisdictions. You might have regional, you might have enterprise, and then you might have multinational, or any combination or different setups. The reality today is that quite often, for the policies, you actually even have contradicting policies across jurisdictions, which is the real issue. So quite often, well, 95% of the time, the issues are not technology related, the issues are policy related and culture related. So for the jurisdictions, one of the issues that we have in Canada, as I work closely with several different governments, is that you might actually have a requirement at a federal level saying all offenders that were actually convicted of an offense of this nature, their records have to be removed after 10 years. Provincially, there might be a policy and regulation saying that all criminal data of any person has to be kept for at least 12 years. Well, you go, well, wait a second, right? I mean, you can't code that, right? So a lot of the policies actually have to be synced up because those policies were previously done in isolation, and now you have to actually get them to map and work. So that's one of the major challenges. And of course, all of that is always dependent on the data classifications and the data categorizations. So it depends on the sensitivity levels of the data. So at ISO, they've broken it down basically into higher risk and medium risk and lower risk. And then everything is all residing on and has to be in consideration of the storage elements, the process elements, and data in transit considerations as well. So in the INTOS and OpenStack elements, then you could take those concepts from this model and again, translate it into the OpenStack elements that might need to be discussed or might need to be customized in order to actually execute a geo-jurisdiction requirement. So for the storage then, we have Cinder, Manila, Swift, Ceph, process side, Nova, Glance, et cetera. For the on transit side, it might be Open Daylight. So the key is you can actually map them back into and identify what elements might actually need to be refined, extended, customized, configured, et cetera, to actually satisfy those requirements. On the right-hand side, you also are going to have things that are going to cross boundaries, such as Keystone doing identity management, because that's at the security level, or Horizon doing the actual management platform activities. OpenStack's also working on something which I didn't realize until I was doing research for this, but around geotagging. And again, I actually provided links and references in the document that I actually mapped to, that they'll show you at the end. But I think it's really important just to be aware that they are actually working on this initiative. Is anybody in this room familiar with this initiative? No. Okay. So just always curious just to see in terms of what level of maturity, because I believe it's still under development. So it's still being refined, still being worked on. When this moves and is actually, trusted, geotagging is going to obviously provide a lot of the automation that's going to enable the geo jurisdiction requirements. Some updated perspectives then. So this is a model that I put together a couple of years back because I found there was a lot of confusion when I was talking to people because they were using the terms with different definitions. So I put this together just to try to clarify some of the perspectives that need to be considered, especially today. One of them is the idea that you actually don't have just one type of a provider. You actually have a primary provider and an intermediary provider. So a primary provider is actually where the infrastructure is actually running. The intermediary provider basically is running on top of that particular solution. So an easy explanation is actually most of the vendors here are actually intermediary providers, right? Quite often they're going to be actually providing products and services that are actually running on somebody else's infrastructure. Another example is you have a primary provider in the application space will be Salesforce. Then you might have developers that are developing using the Force.com platform, their particular application solutions. So they're actually an intermediary provider because, of course, if that particular application fails, you're going to be actually contacting that software as a service provider who actually built their software on the Force.com platform that happens to be running on top of the Salesforce platform. So you actually have those elements of different types of providers because, of course, you're going to actually have different compliance controls based on what type of a provider that you are. And then on the right side, what's been a hot topic here this week is the edge computing. And there's also terms around mist computing and fog computing. And I learned a couple of weeks ago while I was in Poland for the ISO meetings, also droplet computing. And yeah, it's interesting. So there's definitely some marketing spin going on. ISO are currently actively working on defining the different terms around edge and mist and fog and whatever else that entails. So I think that's good to know that people are actually trying to work on it, to try to clarify it, just to stop the marketing spin that's going to be happening moving forward. Okay. And one of the other complexities in this realm is, of course, great, we're also going to be across geo-jurisdictions with these fog and edge computing aspects, which adds then another layer of complexity on top of everything. Because now for compliance controls and evaluating if products are actually in compliance and processors are in compliance, now you've got another layer around geo-jurisdictions because you might not necessarily know where the nodes are in the edge or in the fog. So you really need to think around those terms. Now, one of the things I did learn this week here was that you know, the overall structure and foundation for OpenStack was based on more of a centralized approach. So there's a lot of recognition in the discussions this week around the edge computing scenarios is, oh shoot, we're going to actually have to try to adjust things for this to really work well now in the edge environment, because it was not designed like that. So Keystone was not designed with those elements. Glance was not designed with those considerations. So all those project teams are now starting to realize, oh shoot, we're going to have to try to figure out how we're going to handle this. And on top of it, then we've got the Internet of Things, right? Which sometimes, some of those Internet of Things devices, some people have arguments saying, are those really edge devices or are the Internet of Things devices? I don't care. The reality is, you have to consider those as well. And there's other groups that are actually working on some of those definitions as well. I'm just going to make sure that I didn't blow by one thing here. Oops. Just want to make sure. That one. Oh. Okay. Don't know why I didn't pick up that. Okay. Anyways, the OMG, I'll verbally talk through it, and it is actually cross-referenced. The Object Management Group actually has a distributed data service that they've been working on. And to actually handle the Internet of Things connectivity. And IEEE is also working on it, and there's other groups as well. And OpenStack might even be working on it as well. I'm just not aware. Okay. So on that note, there's non-OpenStack related services and activities that are worthwhile to be aware of. So you actually have the standards bodies, which are great because organizations like ISO, you've got all the leaders from different countries all in a room sitting around arguing about what the definitions are and what the models are moving forward. If these guys reach an agreement, use it rather than reinvent the wheel. So standard side, of course, ISO, IEEE, ETSI, NIST, etc. Then you've got the open groups, okay, the multiple open group communities. That includes ORCA, which is the Open Research Cloud Alliance, which are part of the Cloud Federation group meeting upstairs. Then you actually have communities of interest, such as the TM Forum side, on the telco side, DMTF, NISA, Object Management Group, ISACA, which are the auditors. So they've been writing documents around performing cloud audits and assessments. Cloud Security Alliance. And in Canada, there's actually a group called CENGN, and they actually have a booth here as well. So it's actually a community which was actually established based on a combination of government funding and private sector funding to do proof of concepts around SDN NFV. So it's important just to recognize these different types of communities actually do exist so that you can leverage the work that they've done instead of trying to reinvent the wheel or invent something yourself. Then there's proprietary products and services that should be considered. So there's a really cool product that I met when I was down in Australia last year called Token One. So they do multi-factor authentication based on tokens and pad tables for your handsets, and then you can recognize where that handset is. So that could be used to actually assure where that particular user is located. You've got in Canada even groups like Cloud Ops out of Montreal, where they've been working on kind of a lightweight touch cloud management platform as well. So those products are actually built on OpenStack, or at least Cloud Ops is. The Token One is not. But the key is there are lots of products outside of the OpenStack arena as well that can maybe fill in some of those gaps while OpenStack is trying to kind of push some of those products and services and projects forward. There might be some private sector solutions that you'll want to leverage to fill those gaps immediately, and then recognize you might want to transition to an OpenStack solution as it actually matures. So I really do recommend and encourage groups to research and participate. So INTOS, what INTOS has done is they basically have taken the information that I've been telling them, and then they've started to flag and within their enterprise architecture where things actually fit and what things actually need to be adjusted and customized. So of course, APIs are going to be impacted, Keystone, and it's a matter of they recognize that they need to incorporate the appropriate policy controls into their product and make sure they actually have the appropriate policy management controls in place as well. So some of the lessons that we learned and INTOS has learned in the last year is that using those reference architectures that are available from the industry is really very beneficial because it generates open communication and transparency, and then you can figure out exactly how are these things going to actually fit together and how are we going to actually execute on them. And that goes on both sides from the standpoint of using the industry standardized reference architectures and information, but also establishing your own enterprise architecture so you understand all your pieces and how these are going to fit together and integrate. Because now, the world we're in now, this is an integration world. It's not a building everything yourself world. Right? It's a matter of integrating all the pieces together. Of course, GDPR has just pushed the geo jurisdiction considerations right to the forefront, including portability. So one of the things that many people don't realize is that under GDPR, if you're, for example, using something in social media, okay, there's the normal aspects around, well, you actually have to provide rights, and you have to provide informed consent over how they're using the data, et cetera, et cetera. They also have to provide you an exit strategy, where if you decide you don't like that social media product, you can actually port all your data to somebody else's. That's also part of GDPR. So it's very interesting. There's a lot of the elements that we're all aware of, but there's some underlying elements as well that actually include portability. OpenStack actually does have a variety of tools and techniques supporting geo jurisdiction, hybrid cloud deployment, and governance that can be and should be actually extended as we move into this hybrid cloud geo jurisdiction-centric world where you're going to actually have different compliance controls based on your service models, your deployment models, your geo jurisdictions. Keystone in OpenStack, Keystone on the identity management side and also policy management side, right, are going to be key elements to actually refine and utilize and incrementally extend moving forward. So it's not magic. There are complex challenges for sure. It is executable as long as you kind of think about things incrementally and don't try to boil the ocean. You're not going to be able to solve. You're not going to be able to have multi-regulatory environments, multi-provider environments. No, just break it down. Think about what are your specific priorities and how do you actually move forward. So planning and architecting is required. Focus on priority use cases. Refine your own checklists. So I always like analogies of cockpits and flying aircraft. So the reasons why a lot less aircraft crash today is because they actually have checklists so that the mistakes folks made in the past are not repeated. Might take a little bit longer time to sit in the cockpit before takeoff and just say flaps, 15 degrees check, etc. But they're not going to make those obvious mistakes. So we do need checklists, but then you also need to automate where possible. Similar again to a cockpit, you have these fly-by-wire systems and much more automation as well in the cockpit just to make sure you don't try to land while your landing gear is still up. So they have those sorts of automation and control sets. So for the IT world, I see that, again, expanding into more automation moving forward. And you want to really try to trial and demonstrate capabilities incrementally. So the INTOS platform, as I mentioned earlier, they feel comfortable enough that they're ready for trialing so that people can go in and benchmark and just see, well, how does this actually work? What are some of the challenges? What are actually some of the performance constraints? How does it actually really dynamically scale? And are there any issues around performance, or is the performance as we were expecting? And is the availability levels as expected? So what we've covered right now is there's lots of different considerations around hybrid clouds and geo jurisdictions and compliance. This is something that I put together just proposing back to the OpenStack community that they should consider using it just as a framework to maybe generate some of the discussions, just so that they don't try to boil the ocean. So in terms of, you could identify what are some of the elements, being Keystone, Glance, Nova, Ceph, Open Daylight, for example, covering those 3 elements that I had under the geo jurisdiction model. And then think about what makes sense for us to really prioritize on and focus on as a realistic scenario 1, increment 1. Not boil the ocean, what's going to be kind of a logical first step. And then how do we actually need to maybe improve the functionality within the products, or maybe improve the performance on those products, or improve the security on those products, and maybe automate those products. And then just kind of walk through it, you know, in a structured, repeatable fashion, so that you actually can have a realistic plan rather than saying, well, we're going to solve everything. It's not going to happen. You know, you really need to think about how to actually organize and structure things and make those incremental progress and incremental successes along the way. The edge scenario is going to be really complex because, again, the OpenStack Foundation just was not set up with that mindset of having distributed, you know, to the extent the edge is. And honestly, the other groups, including ISO, there's a lot of confusion around the edge too. So it's a major challenge, but it is here. And on that note, went to check, you know, I was checking my, my email last night, and this came up saying, my hotel stay for tonight, I can download my key to my phone, right? So I mean, just proof in terms of this stuff's here, right? It's not like, oh yes, eventually, no, it's now. So right now, they're using my phone as an edge device where I'm gonna go and check in. So I'm kind of a security guy, so I'm not. But, you know, it must be secure, right? But you start thinking about all the different elements that they might not have thought about, which is kind of interesting because I don't know. Like, how do you actually, I'm not sure. I don't want to be a guinea pig, though. I know that, so I'm not using it tonight. So that's that part of the presentation. I do have 5 minutes, and what I was wanting to do is actually, so that's the contact information. Close this down here. So this is actually the little discussion area there where I actually put the links, etc. So basically, if you go to that etherpad openstack.org, hybrid-geo, I actually listed off some of the links that actually has the OpenStack information in it, the ISO guidelines, the IEEE P2302 around Cloud Federation, the Object Management Group, which was the group that actually had that DDS element. And what is interesting is, on the ISO side, a lot of people don't realize that a lot of their documents are publicly available. Okay, so this is where I was talking about saving money by being here. You can go to the ISO site and you'll pay quite often. I mean, they are very, very reasonable priced documents quite often, but you still get tired of paying, you know, 60 or 80 or 90 Swiss francs for all the documents. Yeah, you go here to this link here, publicly available standards, which is already here. And basically you go in and you pick one, whatever, there's lots here. Okay? The cloud ones are actually down as 17788 and 17789, which we just actually got up here. Yeah, there's a few documents here. So that would add up to, I'm saying, several $1,000s if you would have bought them all. And Yeah, you go in and you just say, here's the 17788, which is the Cloud Computing Overview and Vocabulary. 17789 is their reference architecture. Basically, you go there, and they actually have a license thing, just saying you're going to use it for your own use. You accept, downloads. No charge. But it's kind of interesting because they are free, but you have to know they're free from here. Okay? Okay, so that's it. Questions? Happy to entertain any questions. I'll ask you to use the mic just for those remote users that might be checking in online. Okay, doesn't look like it. I'm going to be here, or I'm going to be up in room 306, working on some of the IEEE Cloud Federation activities. Have any questions? You can reach out to me, and you can get that link where I did actually put those other linkages. If you do actually have standards that you actually think are worth looking at, for me to look at, as part of my job of writing some of these different security and compliance frameworks for edge computing and the security definitions in the international space, and also I'm looking after the the geo-jurisdictional ones as well. Please type them in there, and then that way I'll know, some other references that I should be probably referring to, because it's a huge community in the IT space. And I, like everybody else, I want to make sure I'm reusing what others have done rather than banging my head against the wall, trying to invent something from the ground up. Thanks very much.